our fire manager in North Carolina. Her name's Margaret Bucher, and she says I'm an evangelist for fire in the mountains. The reason being, I grew up with a uncle who I loved deeply, but he was a fire suppression guy for the Forest Service. And my grandmother, who would be 106 if she were alive today, used to tell me he was living in the forest because she could remember when it looked much differently. And my father was born in a logging camp in Western North Carolina, and one of the last hikes I took with him was in Bonanza Haley, which is the National Forest in North Carolina, and he was talking about how different the forest looked, how it was just getting choked in, and it just didn't look the way he remembered it as a child. So I figure everything I can do to make controlled burning happen in the Appalachians is a great thing, and that's pretty much where I put a lot of my effort into. I want to tell you a little bit about the Nature Conservancy and about how we talk about things and why we talk about things the way we do. We're a very science-driven organization. If you go on our website, everything talks about we're true to science, everything's based on science. And that's the case when we do our talking as well. The Nature Conservancy spends millions of dollars on research, audience research, on how to talk about conservation in a way that appeals to the general public. So when I'm talking to you today, I'm talking about research that has been done that is aimed at non-particular communities, because you may be talking like when we talk to communities near colleges, we know that they actually understand things a little bit differently, or people who, when we're talking about general public and we don't have a real good grasp on how they feel about things, that's what this research is based on. But after the last election, you might understand why the Conservancy does its research the way it does. They employ a Republican pollster and a Democrat pollster who work together on all the public opinion work that is done about how we talk about conservation. The reason being, polls tend to be left-leaning or right-leaning, and it depends on how you write the questions. So they're trying to get very much down the middle of these polls so that they have real relevance. And when we talk about the polls that I'm going to be talking about today, we're talking about polls that are very large, national, and have about a three-point either way margin of error. So they're very good polls. I'll also talk about focus groups. I don't know if any of you know what focus groups are. Focus groups are not polls. Polls are big, they're scientifically valid. You can talk about numbers. Focus groups help you hone in on what you find in polls. So a lot of times you'll have a poll and you kind of see what people are saying, but then you want to get a group of people together, be different kinds of people, how you set the focus group up, and talk with them individually, one-on-one. You have somebody who that's their job, who's paid to run a focus group, these people are, to kind of hone in your messages. So that's the kind of research I'm talking about here today. I'm going to give you some general conservation language that has been done through this research, and then we'll talk specifically about, and I'm going to call it controlled burning because that's what this data certainly shows for the general public is the right term to use, but we'll get into that. First thing, up in front. First of all, some general conservation language. One of the things that plays well with the whole world is water. So anytime you can use water as a solution to whatever you're doing in conservation, as the end result, the public loves water, so water's first. Public health and safety with the general public when you're talking about conservation plays well as well. Natural defenses, things that, you're doing things that naturally help protect you or help protect the environment. And then finally, just a big mix on climate change or global warming. Once again, we're talking about the general public, and I've sat in on focus groups. When you look at the general public and the way they get these polls, they do the best way to get us to registered voters list. If you look at people who are Democrat or lean left or even sort of center, they're fine with climate change and global warming. But when you get to the slight right, they're dead or rival. And I've been in focus groups where you have a bunch of people who you're talking to them about a conservation issue and they really get it. And at the very end, when you throw in climate change or global warming, they shut down. So those are things to remember. General conservation, conservation language, environment. I will tell you, people have everybody has their own insider speak. When I was in television news, we had our own insider speak. When I went to government and dealt with engineers, they had their own insider speak. For a while, I did public health. Doctors had their own insider speak. And, of course, conservationists have their own insider speak, too. So that's how you talk with each other. It's fine to talk with each other that well. But if you want to be an evangelist and you want to build the audience, you've got to learn to talk in a bigger way outside of the way you would be talking among your peers. So we talk about environment. Make land, air, water. Better to talk about the land, air, water near the preserve you're talking about, as close to the ground as possible. Don't talk about ecosystems, natural areas. Regulations. Regulations don't play well. Once again, when I'm talking about this, I'm talking a lot of times we'll talk to the general public, we want to appeal to everybody, and when you get right of center, just the word regulation shuts people down. But if you talk about things that protect fish and wildlife, reasons that you do things that don't pass in terms of regulations, that works. Riparian, once again, you talk about safeguarding water, but not riparian. Aquifers, that's a groundwater. Watersheds, lands along rivers and lakes. Another one people like to use, but that's more of a planner talk. Conservationists don't tend to say this, but it's viewshed is a view. I mean, let's be honest. The next thing is environmental programs. Now, this is because of where I'm coming from. You'll notice the Nature Conservancy almost always casts itself very carefully as a conservation group and not an environmental group. And that's because we're not Greenpeace and we're not the Sierra Club or the Environmental Defense Fund. Agricultural land, if you talk about it in terms of working lands, working farms, that works better because especially in places like North Carolina and Iowa, where you have a lot of big corporate farming concerns, people think of it and that's sort of negative unless you work in those issues. And so just talk about working farms is better. Urban sprawl, poorly planned growth. Ecosystem services, this is one that this particular polling group has done all kinds of work around because the Nature Conservancy wanted to talk about ecosystem services. Nobody knew what that was. But we talk about it as nature's benefits to people, and it works. You see it in the polling data, and then when you sit in the focus groups, people, when you say nature's benefits to people, don't ever think people are stupid. They're really glad. And then they just start naming what nature's benefits to people are. And they're like, oh, wow, you save water along the stream. That protects our water. You do this. So it really does work out. Conservation, landscape scale conservation. This is another one of these TNC big things we used to use. Just talk about large connected natural areas. Now, in specific, talking about burning, and the Conservancy has done, we do a poll every 2 years related to our Restore America's Forest program. So we've been doing these since 2008 and have been asking for questions around burning since 2008, and it's been pretty consistent. Be interesting, this last poll was done in April, 4 focus groups were as well, it was April of this year. We are considering going in and doing some polling next year after the what happened in Gatlinburg in North Carolina and South Carolina, the fires we had in the Southern Appalachians, to see if that's changed. And one of the reasons that we're considering doing this as an organization is our chapter was doing some focus groups, not on controlled burning. We were actually doing some stuff on just how do you view our chapter so we can communicate better with people. And we were doing focus groups up in the mountains in Asheville. And one of the things we showed them, and this was about a month ago, we showed them an article from our newsletter which talked about bringing fire back to the mountains. And this was these people had to be in this focus group, they had to show some interest in conservation, not be somebody who contributes to us, and not be somebody who, they had to like the outdoors more than anything else. And they had to do, of course, registered voters that stay together. But anyway, so in talking with them and then reading that story, all of a sudden, those focus groups became all about controlled burning because they made the connection, even though that story did not make it very clear at all. It was a very not strong connection at all. It's really about ecosystem stuff, about how if you burn and you're bringing back all these beautiful things, these really cool things. The mountains are going to be so much better off. It didn't talk that much about, there was one line in the document that it also removes fuel. And yet they focused in on that so totally and were all about, hey, if we did more burning, we wouldn't have those big fires. Would this help prevent those fires? So they kind of got off on that tangent, which has led us to believe we probably need to do some polling in that area to see just how we can use that horrible event, certainly in Tennessee, to move forward. Stressing safety was very high with the general public when you talked about fire, and they just was, in particular, safety about being #1 priority, being at the top of the list. If you see any Nature Conservancy news releases on fire, we almost always start out with safety as #1 priority. No fire is set until all the conditions are right. There's all kinds of terms to use there, but it certainly played very well. But I also want to talk through here a little bit when I'm showing the pictures with these slides and kind of I'll talk a little bit about visuals. So of course, the first one was water. Water is always a beautiful visual if you're looking into it. When you're showing fire, I'll also tell you that the data that the Conservancy has done so far, specifically focus tested data, shows the pictures of fire themselves particularly, but you really should be showing desired conditions. You should be showing beautiful things that come back afterwards. For instance, our brochure on bringing fire back to the mountains shows a mountain, Heller's blazing star, which is a beautiful flower that's federally endangered, and it only occurs in some parts of the Southern Alps, and it is fire dependent. And we've found that in focus testing, at least, those pictures of things that are really cool and beautiful and wonderful, those tend to play better with fire, with the message of why we do fire. But in general, if you are showing fire pictures, this is a Southern Alps picture. This is one that got a lot of play. It's actually taken by, we get a lot of coverage on our burning, and this was taken by the Asheville Citizen-Times for a Forest Service fire that we helped burn on. The Nature Conservancy in North Carolina does a lot of partner burning because the Forest Service and the local Forest Service and local parks, it's so difficult in the bureaucracy to be able to hire a temporary fire crew. So we've been very successful with donors selling fire to them so they support fire in the state. And we hire, train, insure for our fire crews that are on call for other partner organizations, particularly government agencies, to use in their work. Also, we burn on private land using those crews. Now, this is from the latest poll that the Conservancy did in April about how to talk about, among other things, putting fire on the land. And if you'll notice, there are when you're talking about that it's plus 3 or so degree of certainty between how this is a pretty interesting number. Notice the control burning, 47% of people like that. When you talk the next thing, controlled fire. Control is very important here. It worked well. Managed burn was next. And then prescribed was the lowest of all. Even unknown, don't care, can't give a darn. That was higher than prescribed fire with the general public. And here's why. When you go to focus groups and you talk to those focus groups and you say, why do you not get prescribed fire? They don't get it because they hate health care. They hate the health care system in America. And if you think about it, our last election, one of the big deciding points was about Obamacare. People are really angry and have been for more than a decade without health care, the state of health care. So why would you want to link something to an unpopular program, which health care is? The same poll looked at what were the biggest concerns facing people in America, and health care was the #1 concern. So that's the reason, when you drill down, that it doesn't work, that you're linking it to some negative, really high negative, and it just doesn't play with the general public. Things that you should do when you're talking the talk. We talk about teams, and that's because people, when you go to focus groups, because you really need to go after you've done polling, the team parts seem to play well, but then you drill down and say why. It's because people want to think there's not just one person out there setting a fire. That kind of looks like a pyromaniac. But when you talk to them, that you've got all kinds of people from different, it really works well. We've got all kinds of different expertise. Some of our fire crews, we have local meteorologists who we train. They were interested. They were helping us get spot weather reports, and they said, well, could we be fire trained? They're like, heck yeah, because getting a meteorologist on the crew to be there when you got reporters coming out is way cool, because they can talk to the weather conditions. And in fact, it's we've been a couple of times very cool when we've had to scrub a fire at the last minute because of weather. We've had a meteorologist there to talk about, well, this is why we did it. We're never going to light a fire when it's not the proper time to do so from a weather perspective, so that's pretty nice. Stress expertise. Our on-call fire crew in the mountains, which is the one that helps with burning other people's land, 16 members, and a lot of them are either retired Forest Service with 30-plus years of service, or they work for local fire departments. There's a whole range of things there, but one of the things that in a local focus group we did there that played really well was the fact that we could say that this group had more than 250 years of combined expertise in fire. That really seemed to reassure people from a safety standpoint. And I do want to stress trying to get, if you're stressing teams and stuff, we do try to get our visuals. Some of this is our burn boss, Angie Carl, who recently, by the way, was the Nature Conservancy's #1 burn boss for putting the most fire to the land, which is a big deal in North Carolina because we're not one of those systems out west or the Midwest where we have Arkansas, for instance, where you put a lot of fire out easily. She had to work really hard to reach that level. But anyway, she takes pictures of all her crews. And in particular, this is a very young crew, and we use it to encourage, we go to colleges in the area to encourage them to come get fire trained because we need volunteers and they need credit, and she teaches a class in fire local community college. Talking to talk, one of the things the Conservancy and its overall polling has shown consistently is they like to see people who they consider to be professionals, who are talking, who are being interviewed on camera. And when you drill down in focus groups, what that means when they talk about professionals is they're talking about somebody in a uniform or somebody who is obviously, it could be a park ranger with a Smoky Bear, with a hat. It could be a Forest Service person with a white uniform. It also is a fire team member in Nomads. And one of the other things we found that we're doing TV, that they love more than anything in the world is to have an extra set of Nomads on hand and let the reporter dress up in Nomads. If you watch television, when the reporter stands and talks at the end of the story or in the middle of the story, whatever they choose to do, that's called a stand-up. Okay, that's logical since they're standing up. But anyway, they love doing that from a fire in Nomads with the fire behind them. It's a really cool way to get them out there. It's a selling point. I just had a call yesterday while I was coming here with a woman who wanted to know when she's going to get to wear the Nomex this year because she's ready. So it's a good selling point. So basically what I want to stress here is that frontline messengers are the best. The further you get from the front line, the further you get away from the people who are least perceived as knowing the most, and they do know the most. And that appearances do matter. And of course, I have to stress to this group of folks, you want to make sure everybody's got on the right gear. They've not got anything on that's dangerous. In general, about talking the talk, the things to talk about here are around burnings, wildlands. It's weird when they do these polls. One of the things you think the wildlands would be the most concerning people are living in cities, but it's not. It's really odd. The southeast, people across the southeast just have a real problem with wildlands, and people nationwide do as well. So just talk about natural areas. WUI, wildland-urban interface, that means nothing to the vast majority of the public. And I can give you an example. We had a community meeting a few years ago where we were going to be burning an area we'd never burned before. We always do community meetings before we burn a new area. And one of our presenters kept talking about WUI, and finally the mayor of the town stood up and he said, I'm getting all nauseous in here talking about WUI because it kind of makes me think bluesy. What is that? So, if somebody has been being nauseous and can't figure it out, and one is, I would say, ask Dr. Google if you got a problem, and this guy was 70, probably not ask Dr. Google. It's appropriate just to not talk about WUI, but talk about natural areas and your towns. So it's nice to have cities, nice to have a place you can point to if you're talking to a particular community and say, well, like such and such. We always point to Jordan Lake State Park near Raleigh because that's a state park that's very close to a very urbanized area. So it's something specific. Appropriate management response, that's very bureaucratic. Just talk about the specific actions you took. If you had, what did you do if the fire got out of hand to make things less dangerous for the people, the communities? What do you do if you have a spot fire? Just don't say I took appropriate management response. Actually talk about specific things that you do. Mechanical fitting. My husband is he actually does a lot of volunteer work for our chapter because he's he's really good with checks. And he's an engineer. And when I went to work with the Conservancy, he was looking through some stuff we had early on. And he was like, what's mechanical fitting? Even, I do a lot of it, and I don't like to think of it as mechanical fitting. It's, it's cutting. It's moving stuff. It's not, it sounds bizarre to say mechanical fitting. Natural fire regime, that's another one people like to throw around, and the public doesn't know what you mean. What you want to say is, hey, fire used to occur here every 7 years, every 10 years, every whatever, and this is what we used to have as a result. We don't have it anymore. For instance, in the southern Appalachians, we've got pretty good data to show that fire occurred in some of the areas, with a 15, 20-year interval. It hasn't been out for a century. And now we got all these sugar maples. We got all these red maples. We don't have little oaks. We don't have little hickories. What does that mean? Well, in terms of you're a deer, you like to hunt deer, it means they ain't got nothing to eat in a few years. That kind of thing. So just talk about the regime in terms that people can understand. And of course, alter fire dynamics, the same thing. What's changed? Why don't you burn here as often? Why haven't you burned here as often? What are the things that have changed on the landscape? So that really is, I'm always very quick, which is merciful, I think, to people who are listening. So I think we could just go ahead and go into the questions and answers for the whole day.